You woke up to silence, not the usual morning quiet, the gentle kind. This was a deep, unnatural stillness. The birds were not singing. The distant hum of traffic was gone. You stood at your window, coffee growing cold in your hand. The world outside seemed frozen in place. It was like the entire planet was holding its breath. Everyone felt it. A text from your friend simply said, "You feel that too?" There was no need for more words. Something was coming. You just didn't know what it was. A strange tension filled the air. It felt heavy, like the pressure before a storm. But the sky was perfectly clear. Then you saw it. On the news at first. A single, perfect wave. It wasn't a tsunami. It wasn't violent or chaotic. This wave was a smooth, clean line of water. It stretched from horizon to horizon. It moved with an impossible speed and grace. The wave traveled across the Pacific, then the Atlantic, then every ocean on the planet. It did not crash upon the shores. It simply passed through other waves. A silent, continuous ripple encircling the globe. Scientists had no answers. They just stared at the data in disbelief. The wave did not lose energy. It did not stop. It just kept going. A pulse of liquid energy. A heartbeat for a world that had gone still. You felt a shiver run down your spine. This was not a natural event. It was a signal. That's when they arrived. There was no fire, no grand explosion heralding their entrance. One moment, the sky was empty. The next, it was full. Vast, silent ships hung in the upper atmosphere. They were not sleek or aerodynamic. They were jagged, uneven shapes. Like shards of obsidian, they defied all known laws of design. Their surfaces were perfect mirrors. They reflected the world below in 1,000 fractured pieces. You could see your own city twisted and bent. Oceans and continents were warped on their hulls. They made no sound. They gave off no heat. The ships just floated there. Silent judges over a world that had forgotten how to breathe. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing you had ever seen. The perfect wave on the seas now had a partner in the sky. A voice spoke. It wasn't through your ears. It was inside your head. A calm, resonant tone that spoke to every single person on Earth. It spoke in every language at once. The voice was neither male nor female. It was ancient and powerful. It was the voice of a being that measured time in the lives of stars. And it carried a message, a great and terrible purpose. The voice announced that they were the harvesters. They had come not for conquest, not for a fight. They had come for the oceans, for the water that gave your planet life. You stumbled back from the window. Your heart pounded against your ribs. The voice was so clear, so certain. It felt more real than your own thoughts. It was a violation on the deepest level. Humanity was no longer alone, and our world was no longer our own. Then, from the mirrored hulls, the siphons descended. They were colossal tubes, miles long. They uncoiled from the ships like metallic serpents. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose that was horrifying to watch. Hundreds of them, then thousands. They dropped from the sky over every ocean on the planet. The siphons were dark and smooth. They absorbed the light around them. As they neared the water, the tips opened. A vortex of energy swirled at their mouths. There was no splash. The water simply began to flow upward. It was a silent, relentless drain. A quiet apocalypse unfolding in broad daylight. You watched on your screen as entire bays were pulled into the sky. The perfect wave was gone. It had been the ringing of a dinner bell. And the guests had finally sat down to eat. The change was immediate and catastrophic. The oceans began to recede at an incredible rate. Coastlines you had known your whole life vanished in minutes. Beaches became vast plains of wet sand. Harbors emptied, leaving ships to rest on the muddy seafloor. On the news, the graphics were stark. Red lines showed the old coastlines. Blue areas showed the shrinking water. The blue was disappearing fast. You could feel the planet changing around you. The air grew drier. A salty, brine-filled wind swept across the continents. It was the dying breath of your world's seas. The harvesters were not just taking the water. They were taking the very essence of your planet. The voice in your head remained silent. Its one message had been delivered. Now, there was only the cold, efficient process of the drain. Humanity did not surrender quietly. A desperate, unified fury rose across the globe. For the first time in history, all nations acted as one. They threw everything they had at the silent ships. Nuclear arsenals streaked into the sky. Missiles launched from silos, submarines, and hidden bases. The most powerful weapons ever created by man raced toward the mirrored invaders. You watched the feeds, a knot of hope and fear in your stomach. The missiles struck their targets. Huge, silent flashes of light erupted in the atmosphere. For a moment, just a moment, you thought it had worked. But when the light cleared, the ships were still there. Unmarked, unscathed. The mirrored hulls did not even have a scratch. They had not even bothered to deploy defenses. Our ultimate power was nothing to them. It was like throwing stones at a mountain. The attack had failed. And with it, humanity's last hope of fighting back began to fade. As the waters vanished, something new appeared. The draining oceans uncovered a world no one knew existed. Entire landscapes rose from the deep. Mountain ranges taller than any on the surface emerged. Vast canyons carved by ancient, powerful currents were revealed. And on these new lands, there were cities. Ancient, non-human cities. Their architecture was alien. Impossible geometric shapes and towering spires made of a dark, resilient stone. They were ruins, but they were not worn by time. They seemed almost preserved, waiting. The discovery was a shock wave. History books were not just wrong, they were irrelevant. Another intelligence had lived on Earth, long before us. They had built these cities on the ocean floor, and for some reason, they had disappeared. The seabed held more secrets than we had ever imagined. The voice returned. It spoke inside your head once more. Not with a threat, but with an explanation. A cold, factual statement that chilled you to your core. The harvesters, it said, were nomads. They traveled the void between galaxies, and they required a specific kind of fuel, a fuel that was rare and potent. Hydrogen atoms, perfectly structured within a water molecule. Specifically, water from a life-bearing planet. The biology of a world altered its water on a quantum level. This made it incredibly energy-dense for their star drives. They had harvested countless worlds over millions of years. Earth was just the latest in a long line of cosmic fueling stations. Your planet's life was not a miracle to them. It was a resource. The oceans were not the cradle of life. They were a tank of high-grade starship fuel. You realized with dawning horror, this had happened before. The atmosphere was changing. With the oceans gone, the planet's water cycle was broken. The air grew thin, dry, and sharp in your lungs. Clouds became a distant memory. The sky, once a brilliant blue, slowly began to shift. It turned a pale, sickly yellow, then a dusty orange. Finally, it settled on a deep, permanent ochre red. It was the color of rust, the color of a world dying of thirst. The sun glared down from this new sky. Its light was harsh and unfiltered. Dust from the empty sea basins swept across the continents. It coated everything in a fine, reddish powder. You looked out your window at a landscape that was no longer Earth. It was a foreign planet, a desert world under a blood-red sky. You even started to miss the mirrored ships. They at least broke up the endless, depressing red. Experts and explorers rushed to the newly revealed abyss cities. They searched for answers, for anything that could help. In the heart of the largest ruin, they found it. A massive chamber with walls covered in intricate carvings. It was a story told in stone. The images were clear. They showed a thriving star-born civilization. They showed the arrival of giant mirrored ships. They showed siphons draining the oceans of a world. And they showed a warning, a desperate final message from this lost civilization. The carvings depicted the harvesters. But they also showed something else, a specific pattern, a series of frequencies and resonances, a sonic key. The ancient race had not been able to use it in time. But they left it for the next civilization to find. A chance, a weapon hidden in a song. The great fleets of the harvesters began to change. The silent, mirrored ships started to glow. A soft, blue-white light pulsed from within their hulls. The energy of Earth's stolen oceans was being processed. It was being prepared for ignition. The light grew brighter and brighter. The ships became miniature suns hanging in the red sky. You could feel a low hum in the ground, a vibration that resonated in your bones. The siphons had retracted. The harvest was complete. The engines were charging. The voice did not need to speak again. The message was clear. They were about to leave. And they were taking the lifeblood of your world with them. The sky burned with the power of your own oceans. A final, terrible insult to a dying planet. It was a spectacular sight. A funeral pyre for a world, and you had a front-row seat. The only seat, really. The discovery of the resonance key spread like wildfire. It was humanity's last, desperate gamble. The carvings showed a complex series of sound waves. A specific frequency that, according to the ancient story, could disrupt the harvester's engine ignition. It wouldn't destroy them, but it might interfere with their energy systems. It might cause a catastrophic failure in their FTL sequence. The physics were beyond modern science. It was a prayer based on alien acoustics, but it was the only prayer you had left. There was no time to build a specific weapon. There was only time to use what you already had. Every speaker, every radio, every device on the planet capable of making a sound. The plan was insane. A global orchestra playing a song to save the world. It was probably the most human thing you could do. Try to solve a problem by making a lot of noise. Then, the moment came. A single coordinated command went out. A countdown that ended not in an explosion, but in a note. From every phone, every television, every car stereo, it began. Every stadium speaker, every emergency siren, every radio tower joined in. The world's last song. It was a strange, deeply resonant tone. A chord that seemed to vibrate in your very soul. The air itself thrummed with the sound. It rose from the dying planet. A united voice of defiance from 8 billion people. You stood there, listening to the hum of the world. It was a sound of pure, desperate hope. A final act of unity. A song aimed at the burning stars in your sky. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The ships continued to glow, brighter than ever. And your heart sank. It had been a foolish hope, a story in stone that meant nothing. The light from the harvester fleet intensified to a blinding point. The ignition sequence was reaching its peak. The hum from the ships grew into a deafening roar. And then, silence. The alien ships just vanished. They did not fly away. They did not explode. They were there one moment and gone the next. A flash of impossible light. And then, nothing. The world's last song echoed into an empty sky. The ochre dawn broke over a silent, barren planet. You stood at your window, looking out at the new world. A world without oceans. A world of dust and red skies. The siphons were gone. The mirrored ships were gone. The voice in your head was silent. Humanity had survived. But you were now the keepers of a dry, empty world. The victory was quiet. The cost, immeasurable. You were alive. You were free. And you were alone, under a sky that would never be blue again. The empty dawn was the first day of the rest of your life, and you had no idea what to do next.